This is from Ni Pakpo Samoa Ado. Will you consider a corporate tax to help fund the NHIA, Your Excellency? I believe that it will be difficult to increase corporate taxes, especially when you want to stimulate the economy. Our current corporate tax rate is at 25%. If you want investors, manufacturers, and business people to stimulate jobs, it will be very difficult to pile on another corporate tax. But there are other ways in which we can increase financing to the National Health Scheme, Health Insurance Scheme. And we're going to put a whole list of those alternative financing on the table. I believe that we can make our National Health Insurance much more robust and more sustainable, because it is one of the important lifelines that our people have in terms of having access to good health care. From Edem Kojo Matthias, hello Mr. John Mahama, what will you have done differently in terms of stimulus package for the vulnerable people if you were president today? If you do a lockdown, one of the things you have to have right is your humanitarian intervention, because you are basically asking people to stay at home and not go out and engage in economic activity in order that they can earn an income to feed themselves. Unfortunately, government's humanitarian intervention was a disaster. The whole system of food distribution was so poorly organized, and indeed, that is one of the reasons I believe that forced the president to lift the lockdown. Because if it had continued, people would have faced the option between starving or coming out and taking their chance with the virus. And I believe that, we should have organized this better. I made a point. I said, we have a system where we're able to deliver electricity and water bills to every corner of this country to collect bills for government. Why could we not have the same system to deliver food to the doorsteps of the people? And so these are lessons that we must learn. And I believe that if I was president, I probably would have planned this better and would have executed it in a much better way. SNIT rubbished your recent suggestion to pay contributors a token amount for 3 months to enable them buy food during these COVID times. What do you make of that? Yao Ameko. Yao, I was surprised to hear the response of SNIT. Indeed, I've been a member of parliament for 3 terms. I was in parliament for 12 years. And so I know that the National Pensions Act, Act 766, is what governs SNIT in terms of its operations. But as an experienced member of parliament, I know that allowance is made for amendments to acts in order to allow state institutions to do certain things. So when I made the suggestion, I was not suggesting that SNIT should act illegally by paying those monies. My suggestion was that SNIT and government should consider amending the act so that SNIT could make those payments. We've been in parliament when amendments are brought under certificates of urgency. They are moved in the morning and they are passed by evening. If government has the will and SNIT has the will, then it is possible for this to be done. So my suggestion was not that SNIT should act illegally. My suggestion was that steps should be taken to amend the act so that in these trying times, some part of workers' contributions could be given to them to be able to tide themselves over. And I gave a specific period, for a period of 3 months, until they're able to go back to work and be able to continue their contributions to the Social Security scheme. Moraudu, the MPP has not taken kindly to your statement that the Ghanaian economy is in ICU. They claim that you should know better than it is. Not only the Ghanaian economy that is taking a hit as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is the world over. Well, we have other African countries to learn from. We said our economy was so robust and was the fastest growing in Africa and all that. Ask yourself, how many countries have run quickly to the IMF to go and look for relief? We have next door our neighbors, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, Rwanda, and so many other African countries. If we had one of the best economies, why within only 3 weeks, our economy was almost on the verge of going on its knees, and we had eaten kenke and celebrated leaving the IMF, we quickly ran back to the IMF. You know, I don't know whether we'll eat kenke and celebrate going back to the IMF to go and seek relief. It is the truth. Even before COVID, there were problems with this economy. And I kept pointing out that the Minister of Finance was engaged in creative accounting. He had put a lot of debts and arrears under the line and was not adding them to the budget accounting. I had pointed this out several times. And if you go, if your mother dies and you pretend that she's not dead, you know, when the body starts smelling, everybody will find it. And so when COVID came, you know, the speed with which our economy already, you know, was in crisis was alarming. Indeed, I said the other time that one top government official said that with the kind of foreign reserves we have, our economy can survive for 3 months without any, you know, external intervention if we are faced with a disaster. We were faced with a disaster for only 3 weeks, and already we were seeking external intervention to keep the economy afloat. Abdul Tamani, what would you have done differently if you were president of Ghana now? Would you have lifted the lockdown now or imposed total lockdown or curfew? It depends on the science, and that's why I said I don't know the science and the advice that was available to the president. I don't have that same advice. And so I wouldn't understand the reason for his the decision he took. But experts I've talked to, and the Ghana Medical Association and other such institutions, were quite puzzled that he raised the lockdown at a time that the numbers were increasing steeply. I mentioned earlier, even before the lockdown was lifted, that one of the things we needed to do was to expand testing as quickly as possible, increase our testing capacity so that you know the trajectory the disease is taking. And based on that trajectory, you can take a decision whether to raise the lockdown or to maintain it. But be that as it may, the president has lifted it. And after it was lifted, we're seeing cases in all the regions. And so it means that we must aggressively expand testing, and we must also expand capacity for contact tracing in order that we're able to identify who has been infected and who they have been in touch with so that we bring them into isolation. Unfortunately, we do not have enough isolation centers because several of these facilities were abandoned. We would have had more facilities where we could bring people into isolation, test them, and observe them. If they don't show symptoms of the disease, then you can discharge them back. But unfortunately, we are constrained when it comes to facilities to even isolate these persons who have tested positive for the virus. Emmanuel Metal Labi. Your Excellency, please, what are your plans to develop and equip the pharmaceutical industries so that we can produce drugs and vaccines locally without depending largely on imports? Indeed, I have the track record of supporting the pharmaceutical industry. Indeed, the largest assistance to that sector was made under my government. We, under the EXIM facility, provided 50 million Ghana cedis to Ghanaian-owned pharmaceutical companies to expand their production lines for two purposes. One, to increase the employment of Ghanaians, and then two, to expand their products and enable them begin exports into our neighboring West African countries. And this happened under our regime. Tobinco, NS Chemist, Dan Adams, and several other pharmaceutical companies received this assistance. And during our time, I am aware that they started exports to Liberia, to Sierra Leone, to Burkina Faso, and other neighboring countries. The Ghana Medical Association has stated clearly that they don't have enough doctors to serve in all the districts. Do you have any plans to produce more doctors, or you're just promising? As for promises, we're tired of them. We're still awaiting one district, one factory in my district from Ekuya Owusua Nemaku. Ekuya, thank you very much for your question. As I said, there's a gap in terms of the ratio between doctors and patients. Indeed, there was a time when in the whole of the Upper West region, there were only 12 doctors serving in the region. And so it means that there's space to increase the number of health personnel in all these areas. The way to do it would be to expand training. And so we have the possibility and we have the plan, if we get elected, to look at the University of Health and Allied Sciences and expand the training of medical professionals in that institution, and then also to look at the University of Development Studies and expand the numbers of doctors that we are able to train in that institution. There are other means of fast-tracking the training of doctors. For instance, we have the biomedical science students who do 4 years in university, who can transition to do a medical degree, a fast-track medical degree in 4 years. And so if we get some of these biomedical students who have finished with their first degree onto a fast-track medical degree, we can turn out several more doctors than we are currently doing. And so there are many, ways in which this can be done. And I believe that it is necessary to do so if we are to bring health to the doorsteps of all our people. From Edem Kojo Matthias, hello, Mr. John Mahama. What will you have done differently in terms of stimulus package for the vulnerable people if you were president today? If you do a lockdown, one of the things you have to have right is your humanitarian intervention, because you are basically asking people to stay at home and not go out and engage in economic activity in order that they can earn an income to feed themselves. Unfortunately, government's humanitarian intervention was a disaster. The whole system of food distribution was so poorly organized, and indeed, that is one of the reasons I believe that forced the president to lift the lockdown. Because if it had continued, people would have faced the option between starving or coming out and taking their chance with the virus. And I believe that, we should have organized this better. I made a point. I said, we have a system where we're able to deliver electricity and water bills to every corner of this country to collect bills for government. Why could we not have the same system to deliver food to the doorsteps of the people? And so these are lessons that we must learn. And I believe that if I was president, I probably would have planned this better and would have executed it in a much better way.